If the eyes are indeed the window to the soul, then perhaps the dashboard is the window into the corporate soul. Think about that for a second. Whether it's balanced scorecards, three-way business forecasts, or a custom portal tailored just for you, creating, maintaining, and most importantly, interpreting corporate dashboards consumes a significant amount of time, or at least my time, and certainly the resources in a lot of businesses I work with. And often you find that they just get lost and unread amongst the tens, hundreds, or even thousands of reports that a large company can create every single year. So today we ask, what can AI do to elevate your dashboard game? Can we reduce the time and cost of creating them? And more importantly, can we make sure they actually get used? Hey there, and welcome to the AI Forecast. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present, and the future of data and AI in the enterprise every week. Now, if you haven't already, you know what I'm about to say. Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe. We really do appreciate all the support that brings us. And speaking of support, I have to give a huge thanks to the show sponsor, Cloudera, for bringing us this bringing this podcast to life, I should say. Well, the dashboard, love them, hate them. We aren't going to get rid of them, or are we? Well, to discuss this and more, we're joined by John Santaferraro. John is the host of the Digital Analyst podcast. Highly recommend you have a listen to that, where he helps organizations make sense of the changing AI landscape. He's also CEO of Ferraro Consulting, which brings over 30 years of his experience to bear in analytics, strategic marketing, and AI. With that, welcome to the podcast, John.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It's absolutely superb having you. Hey, before we get into the topic of dashboards, a topic near and dear to my heart, wondering if we could jump into something we call the Fast Four, the Furious Four, the lightning round. Are you ready to do this?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Everyone who comes on the show gets asked the same question. In fact, everyone I meet gets asked the same question. What would people who know you best, John, say is your superpower?
I'm going to have to say that my superpower is storytelling, whether it's over a glass of wine standing in front of an audience of 3,000 people or preaching on a Sunday. Most people don't know this, but I have a Master of Divinity, was a youth pastor for 10 years and started a software company with my worship leader, got venture capital funding. It was eventually bought by Teradata. But historically, I am a storyteller. I'm a preacher. I love to tell a story.
Oh, Lord. That's a testament to your home country of Italy at the moment. All right, next question up. I love storytelling. What's the most impactful technology of all time, in your opinion?
Oh, you know what? I thought about, I think it has to be imaging technology. Because I was going to say X-ray, sonogram. It's got to be healthcare stuff. I mean, for them to be able to take a look inside of our bodies, and eventually for that to be AI powered to actually see what possibly the human mind can't see, it has to be imaging technology.
I love it. Well, they used to be able to look inside your bodies back several centuries ago. The problem was you never survived the procedure. I can tell you've got cancer. The problem is I can't put you back together. All right, next question. What would we talk about AI automating this and automating that for all of these companies? And what would John like to see AI automate for him in his personal world?
You know what? It actually has to, I want to automate everything because I honestly, at this point in my life, I just want to have fun. So I would love to see house cleaning automated, laundry should be automated. The only thing I don't want to automate is cooking because that has far too much pleasure to go with it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Excellent. And last but not least, you're somebody, you mentioned Teradata, so you've been working with data all your life. What are some of the best practices or hacks that you've learned that help give you an edge when it comes to working with data?
Question everything. Absolutely everything. Question the data to see, is the data actually accurate? Is it clean? Question the insight. Where did this come from? Who developed it? Was the data good before it got here? What happened to the data along the way? What data was it combined? You got to question everything. Don't necessarily trust it just because it came through your system.
I could not agree with you more on that. And it really ties in beautifully the topic of dashboards and data narratives, because of course the worst thing you can do is trust a dashboard at face value, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into it. So you mentioned your background, Masters of Divinity. I think you may be the first person with such a background on the show. Tell us a bit about your background. How did you come to be where you are?
Okay, so after this startup company that I co-founded, I went to work for several larger companies, Compaq and then HP. As an executive, did a turnaround at HP for their data warehousing program years ago, and it earned me enough to branch off and build a small consulting company. And I went back and forth from consulting to business. Every once in a while, somebody would come along and tempt me. Right. So I was at VP of product marketing at Parexel when we sold that technology to Amazon. It's now Redshift inside of Amazon, one of the largest databases in the world. I've also worked on the chief analytics officer side and worked for an event company and built a analytic application for the $565 billion event industry when it hadn't been done before. That was a blast to get on the other side. And then for the last 6 years, I've been an industry analyst. 3 years at EMA, the last three years independently. My wife and I packed everything up and moved to Italy. And so me and Starlink are here in Italy operating as an independent industry analyst.
I love it. It's incredible technology. It's certainly changed my life as well. Well, let's talk about business intelligence and the change that AI is bringing. But before we do that, I mean, you've mentioned Teradata, which is a deep cut. I mean, that's like going through my old record collection and pulling out something from Chic in the 70s. Let's start by maybe defining business intelligence, because I guess before we talk about automating it, we should talk about what it is we're actually trying to automate. Let's talk about BI, maybe if you want to give a potted view of its history, what it means, in a contemporary sense to an executive today before we talk about what AI is doing to it.
Business intelligence really came as a trend following data management. So back in the late 90s, people started putting together data in a single place instead of having it be in the separate systems. They called them data warehouses. They built data marts, little data warehouses. But they were trying to figure out, how do we get the insight from that data that we have distilled now, how do we get it to business users? And so they started looking for ways to do that. And before there was anything on a screen, business intelligence came on these long printouts of green paper. And it was just reports and eventually somebody said, maybe with the technology that we could have, we could put a little visualization of that data on the screen. And so they started putting simple graphs and bar graphs and line graphs. And they called it business intelligence because it was something that it was intelligence about the business that the business user could understand. And honestly, it's still the same thing today. It has become more complex. Instead of just a report, you can run complex analytical algorithms against the data. There's so much more. You can visualize it in literally 1,000 different ways. You can drill down into the data. So it's become much more visual. It's become much more interactive. It's become much more analytical, but it's still business intelligence.
Yeah, and I guess what we're witnessing, I guess there's two trends. Number one is your ability to connect your BI tools to so many new data sources. It used to be that it would only be on-prem proprietary data. You can now blend that obviously with a lot of external data. But the second is the whole process of analyzing that data and looking for insights was heavily dependent on the analyst. You mentioned Teradata. Mark Hurd famously was a walking spreadsheet. He had a way of seeing through numbers and remembering them all. He was his own personal data warehouse. But he was an unusual character. Replace him with any other CEO, you wouldn't get the same insights from the same data. I suppose what we're trying to do now is figure out if we can use AI to perform some of those same tasks. How is business intelligence changing in the world of AI?
There's a couple of things that are happening. AI, starting probably about 10 years ago, invaded all of data management and business intelligence. So the storing of data, the processing of data, the distilling of data to be able to get at the insight that is hidden in the data, the merging of many different kinds of data. And then in that business intelligence space, I started covering this as an analyst in 2018. In 2018, there was already natural language processing that was AI enablement. There was already natural language queries back then before the days of Gen AI and LLMs. There was already what was called augmented insight and automated insight, where because the software knew who the user was and how they used the system, they would find insight that they thought would be relevant to that user and surface it up. This was all the way back in 2018. There was also recommendations. You just asked this question, you might want to consider these 3 questions. We're seeing it all now in Gen AI, but you have to know it started back in 2018 that all of this was being done. So today what has happened is 2 things with AI. One, the emergence of a semantic layer, a really powerful human language, business language layer that sits up above the business intelligence, all the dashboards and reports and everything, and obviously all of the data down below that. And it basically, that semantic layer represents intelligence in language that business users will understand. And so instead of having to call a data analyst to say, can you use your BI tool that I will never in my lifetime be able to use, a business user can now ask questions of the data through that semantic layer and get the insight that they need many times without having to go to a data analyst. So it's just making insight more accessible to business users.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I feel at the risk of backtracking, if you maybe indulge me for a minute as we do this, if you cast your mind back, gosh, I would even go back to my first data warehousing project would have been back, it must be 30 years ago, it was when my eldest daughter was born. And it's fair to say that I don't know if the project ever quite lived up to the hype that it generated within the business. And then we saw the emergence of BI and BI tools, your Tableaus and whatnot that appeared. And again, a lot of work went into them. Click, you can name any number of vendors that arose. Some pretty dashboards got created, but it felt to me like, again, there was always a lot more talk about the promise of it than maybe what the value that was delivered. I mean, A, what's your response to that? And B, if you do agree that maybe we never quite got the value out of what we should have, what have been some of the failings of BI and as you see it in the past? Controversial topic, sorry.
Yeah, no. I think one of the things that you nailed was the adoption. That people. It was 15 years ago, at least. People started talking about self-service BI, and anytime somebody told me they had self-service BI, I would say, "Give me your tool. I don't want any instruction, and let me see if I can get intelligence out of it." Because I'm not a technician. I'm not a technologist. I understand all the data. I know how it works. I know what it can do. I help people figure out what to do with it and get value out of it, right? That's different than the person who understands data. And I could never do it because it required data modeling. And I've taken data modeling courses. I even know I've done data modeling, but still most of the BI tools, I couldn't figure out how to use their easy to use data modeling tool within the BI infrastructure. A lot of that today is fully automated. The model generation doesn't have to be human active. You can actually generate a model, a BI model, without any coding, and it just appears, and you tweak it as a human, and then you can begin looking at and finding the insight that you need. But back then, the biggest failure was it was never self-service. It was never easy enough to use, and it always required a data analyst to be able to do what the business needed. The second failing was that because it was complex and it required the data analyst, there weren't enough business people that took time to understand how data worked and how the tools worked. All they knew was that at one point in history, they got a report and they needed a report. And there are still companies today that are acting like BI is a reporting tool. And they have one piece They have one place where they could get 1,000 different answers, but they're still going to their data analysts and they have 27,000, 30,000. I just saw a number today in a blog post, a company that had 60,000 reports. And so now you've just got a spaghetti of reports and dashboards and visualizations it was a complete wreck.
I remember having to go to also because it was sort of enshrined in this, all the data and the access to it lived in this shrine of data, it felt like, and you had to go and talk to the high priest of data, otherwise known as developers, and you'd get told, okay, well, we've got a queue of 30 people in front of you. You'll have to wait 4 months to get your report while we develop it. It was never, hey, I've had an idea, I've got a question. By the time you got the answer to the question, the business opportunity had sailed by.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, I interrupted you, John.
Well, no, and that to your point again, and that made it slow, and people were frustrated constantly. The business couldn't get what they want. The data analysts couldn't keep up with the requests of the business because the businesses just kept building more dashboards and more views and more reports, and it was a complete failure.
But famously, there have been some incredible successes. I mean, whether you use the example of whether it was Target, I believe, with the whole story about the pregnant teenager, but apocryphal, but used well, with great, to your point, with data that you can trust, with a lineage that you can attest to, you can get some fabulous insights.
Yes.
But I'd say, for me at least personally, and with the people I speak to, that sort of sheer cliff that you have to climb to get to the point where you're getting that high fidelity insight out of it, you have to ask yourself the question, am I better off just working a little bit harder trying to get the data?
Let me qualify when I said it failed, I meant the self-service concept failed back then. BI did not fail. BI provided a ton of valuable insight to businesses that saved them millions and billions of dollars. And so BI as a technology has been a tremendous success.
So let's talk about dashboards then, because you've quite famously said that dashboards are not going to disappear, as I asked the question about in the opening, but they'll morph into something you call a cockpit and a contextual experience. What does that mean?
The most challenging thing with BI is the last mile from the insight to the decision. And the challenge is that you have somebody who looks at the data using a BI tool. They create a dashboard or a visualization. They create a story around it, and then they go sell it to the management. And there are executives, you gave the Mark Hurd example. I guarantee you, Mark Hurd knew how to get, he not only had, I worked for him at HP, he not only had it in his head, he knew how to find it in a database using a BI tool, right? But if you have to do this storytelling thing and it goes up and up the ladder and somebody's got to make a decision, then they sit around a boardroom and they try and figure out, okay, now what are we going to do? Now that we have this data, what should we do? Should we do A, B, C, or D? With AI, you have the ability to dialogue with the data in a way that we're very quickly moving to a world where you can get a piece of insight on your dashboard. You can ask the business intelligence tool, why is it this way? The BI tool can have the context of the full nature of the business and data on all the business, and be able to then even make recommendations on what are the possibilities that we have to fix it. And you'll eventually then have everything in that same dashboard to be able to run simulations between A, B, C, and D to figure out which of these choices are the best choices, and what, based on these simulations, what is the impact going to be on the business. And ultimately, the CEO should be able to push a button and do the work that needs to be done, or place the order to the rest of the organization of what needs to happen from that single cockpit. Much like somebody flying a massive airliner. full of passengers in the back, and the impact of the decisions that they make are monumental. And yet they're able to fly this massive plane. They're able to take it off. They're able to land it. And at a certain point, most of what is happening on that plane goes on autopilot. But I guarantee you, the moment that an alert or an alarm goes off on that plane, that pilot is back in control, looking at what's going on, looking at all of the information about everything that's happening on the plane, and having to make decisions about what to do next. And I think that's where the CEO is going to be. That's where the senior VP of supply chain is going to be. Being able to see their entire supply chain and move the business based on weather patterns or based on one supplier that is late on their delivery, all of that in the view and under the control of a senior leader. So I think that's the direction that we're going.
I think that's brilliant. And you're speaking to a pilot, so I have my own views on what happens in the cockpit when things go wrong. But going back to a certain degree, the parallel is a good one, because to your point about question everything, or put differently, triangulate. Don't just take one data point, get three, triangulate to a position of high fidelity and trustworthiness. As we start to introduce these large language models and AI agents, the risk we run, certainly from my perspective, and I think the media have popularized the idea of things like hallucinations, like the fact that in the previous iteration of ChatGPT, it couldn't get 1 + 1 correct. Like, it failed basic math tests. Put differently, we run the risk of garbage in, garbage out, and suddenly executives taking advice from an LLM or an agent that's hallucinating. Talk to me about what you see as being the impacts, the risk, and what we do about guardrails there.
One of my biggest concerns is the fact that people are talking about Gen AI as agentic. And there's this common belief that somehow Gen AI is going to be able to do all of these things that humans now do. Gen AI is really, it's a language model. It's a natural language interface that is really brilliant and intelligent, but it can't handle numbers and it can't crunch numbers. And even if it could handle the numbers right, it's not built to analyze massive amounts of data or transactions that are moving at a fast pace. Gen AI just doesn't work for those things. So you basically then, you have to have a data layer at the bottom, and that is becoming more autonomous. Then you have, above that, you have an analytical layer, and all of that is becoming autonomous as well. Insight data being processed at the data level, analysis being surfaced independently of human interaction. That's becoming autonomous. Then on top of that, you have a semantic layer, and that semantic layer is where Gen AI comes into play. Gen AI needs a semantic layer to be able to understand the business. The business is modeled in the semantic layer. Gen AI sits on top of that. Gen AI should never be touching that data. So you still need the analytical engine to be processing the data, to be able to getting the right answer. And then the Gen AI piece will talk to the semantic layer that will get the results down below, run a query down below, and surface it and bring up a description of what that is. So it can do the querying in natural language. It can describe to you what has come back, because it has all of the metadata about what that data was and where it came from and what part of the business that is, and it understands the semantic layer. Then on top of that, you have the AI agents. The agents aren't the layer. The agents are small software programs that can actually reason and learn and self-learn and act and interact and collaborate and respond based on an objective target that they have. But they then use the Gen AI, but their access to data is always down in that controlled area. So everybody thinks that Gen AI is the magic, and it's not. It's one piece of the magic. And the real magic is going to be in those agentic pieces of software, those little AI agents that are able to act in the ways that human acts, not just doing tasks, but doing roles that humans would fulfill.
Yeah, and look, I disagree with you that you went too deep. I think you're making a really important point, which is just like data warehousing that came before it, where you had to do, ELT, you had to do data deduplication. It wasn't like you just got a data warehouse for free. Throw in your data, answers come out. A lot of hard work went into getting high quality results. And I think what you're saying is the magic is in, excuse me for paraphrasing, the hard work. The devil is in the detail. You've got to get each of those layers correct because each of them informs the other. And if you try and shortcut one of them, all you're going to do is get a crappy result, bad insights, bad outcomes. Is that a reasonable?
Absolutely. And the good news is that you also have AI capabilities in each of those layers now, right? It's not the business agent that is doing business things, but there are the entire data engineering process from the point that you produce a piece of data to the point that it is captured and merged with other kinds of data and cleansed to make sure that everything is consistent and then analyzed. That whole process is now AI enabled, and there are agents that are getting smarter and smarter all the time, so that eventually that whole process will be automated as well. It will become autonomous. Same at the analytic layer. There's AI in the BI tools, right? That not only crunch the numbers, but that can look for insight on their own and make recommendations to a data analyst or a business analyst or a business unit about what they should be looking for, or make dialogue with them, have conversations with them about what matters and why things are happening and why things aren't happening, what risks are involved. So I think that the good news is that there's AI in each of those layers as well.
So let's talk to a couple of things. You used the term metadata a few minutes ago, and you've, I think, referred to metadata as the brain of modern BI. So first up, give us some examples of what you mean by metadata, one of those topics that sometimes means different things to different people, and why you think it's so critical to the future of AI, native BI platforms.
So metadata is the data that describes the data throughout its life cycle, right? So data is born somewhere. It comes from, it's kind of like the anagrapha here in Italy. I can't even remember English, U.S. Departments of service anymore. It's only been 3 years. So the metadata knows exactly, it's got a birth certificate, right? The metadata knows exactly where it was born, the day that it was born, who the parents were, all of that. And then that data is extracted. Okay, well, how was it extracted? Was everything extracted, a little bit of it? The metadata will tell you that. And then guess what? The data gets changed. It has to be transformed to be able to be understood and to get insight out of it. Well, it's really important to know what happened to that data. So the metadata says exactly, well, these two fields were merged into one. They came from these parents. They merged into one, and they were altered because this used to have the date in one way and this used to have the date in other. And now they exist in this form, even though these parent systems don't have them. And then you get into you move it from that data mart that you just made into a big data lake or a data warehouse. Well, how did it get there? What happened along the way? So basically, today you have these big data lakes where all kinds of data is stored just in a basic format file, and the metadata tells exactly what's in it, how it sits, what's in there inside that little bucket, and what is the whole history, what is the whole legacy of that particular piece of data. So you actually know what everything is, where it came from, how accurate it was it cleansed, was it not cleansed? And so it becomes the lifeblood of the AI-enabled business intelligence. That's technical metadata. There's another layer of business metadata that is all the descriptions of that data. Who is the owner of that data within the company? What business processes is it attached to? What business process did it come from? What business process is it attached to? What the insight that's being generated, where will it be used? So there's a whole business layer of metadata. So you can imagine AI just eats this metadata up. And, we today are automating the collection of that, and there's massive amounts of metadata, and the AI literally just eats it up. We could not possibly get that into our minds or keep it in our minds the way that it's kept in these large metadata storages now today. But the AI reads it in a second and does what it needs to do. It becomes the brain of the business intelligence system.
I love it, and I think it's brilliant because we were talking before the show. I've been playing with an analytics tool recently to help with some reporting on a small business, and it's called Sift. No sponsor, so but if you have any ideas about it, give me a phone call. My point being this is that it does this AI narrative over the top of your business, yeah, and it's kind of gets a little irritating because it gets a bit repetitive after a while. It sort of tells the same story. Business is going up, things must be good. Business is going down, things must be bad. Like, tell me something I didn't know. But the point that I was going to make is a bit of metadata that it doesn't have is it tells me that something weird happened in the business in 2019 and 2020. It doesn't know why. Metadata, COVID happened.
Yes.
And point me to one executive who hasn't used the phrase COVID in explaining their 2020, 2019, 2020, 21 reports, that hasn't talked to the inflation that resulted out of COVID. I mean, all of that narrative is necessary to be able to explain the data. I use it as it's almost the canonical example of why metadata and AI need each other, because the numbers don't make sense unless you've got the narrative that goes along with it.
What's beautiful now is you can also collect as a part of that metadata the conversations that people are having about the data. Because they're gonna take their little visualization that they discovered, they're gonna throw it into a Slack, and then there's a whole conversation that goes on about that piece of insight that was surfaced by a business person or a data analyst someplace. How much more valuable is that conversation to the meaning of that data as opposed to just the data and the technical metadata or even the business metadata itself? So we're growing, and that's the beauty of this natural language interface and large language models, that will get smart because they can listen in on all of the conversations that are happening about the data and about the insight and learn things from those conversations that we wouldn't be able to retain that much knowledge.
So let's talk a bit about technology for a second, because a lot of this does eventually boil down to the technology platforms and the tools. I mentioned Tableau as an example. They were almost like the canonical example of BI reporting at one stage. And you would argue that, some of those vendors have become the incumbents of that space. But, I recently noticed, Google has gone from being one of the preferred search platforms now to ChatGPT gets used, because people don't want search results, they want answers, right? And ChatGPT is really good at giving you analysis. As some of these AI native platforms start to appear in the BI world, do you see risk for the incumbents?
I see risk for some of the incumbents. And I've broken down the market as I look at the BI market today into 4 categories. So you have the AI ready vendors that all the way back in about 2017, some of them say before that, I started to see it emerge in 2017, they started AI enabling their platforms. And like I said, by 2018, they were already doing natural language processing. So when ChatGPT showed up on the scene, it was a no-brainer for them to completely integrate that, fully integrate it into their platform, because AI was already at the core of the platform. Then you have kind of on the other end, you have the legacy vendors. When ChatGPT showed up on the scene, they had not AI enabled their platform. They're the second, I call them the tack-ons. And they just plastered ChatGPT to their tool. There was no integration. There were no other automations, no other AI enablements in the platform. But now they had this amazing thing that they could do with ChatGPT. Well, they're the ones that still haven't figured out the accuracy of the data, right? But the ones who had already AI enabled and built semantic layers into their platforms, they're soaring. And then you have the new AI native platforms. They've come on the scene and they're doing really cool things with ChatGPT and with data and information, but they have not built out the enterprise BI capabilities that allows an entire enterprise organization to use business intelligence as one. So they're AI heavy, but enterprise light. So the incumbents are definitely challenging well, there's a fourth. Let me give you the fourth. The fourth is the old BI vendors that they were just so late, even with ChatGPT, that they probably won't exist in a few years. They are already far enough behind the game that they may not exist. And you got to remember, there's over 100 business intelligence vendors. They're big companies, little companies. For some reason, everybody thinks they can become a BI company, and somebody funds them to be a BI company. And I don't understand. That is not going to be the case going forward. It's possible that BI will be commoditized, but it won't be for another 3 to 5 years.
Look, I got to say, as you were talking through that, it's the ones that have just kind of bolted AI on, they've kind of rubbed AI onto it. It's one step away from me from Clippy, the old Microsoft Word assistant. It's like, guys, this is so bad. It just makes it, your tool would be better if you got rid of it, because this is just irritating. It's trying to be helpful, and it's just, you just sit there thinking to yourself, you've just done yourselves a disservice. You're better off waiting a year and getting it right. You're nodding, for those of you listening to the podcast. John's nodding here because I think we all find it equally frustrating to see a piece of software that just doesn't do justice to the technology platform.
And users are unforgiving today. If they start using your platform and it doesn't work correctly, it's on to the next. I'm sorry, they're not going to sit around and play with you until you figure out how to do that. That's why I think that some of those companies are going to lose in the long run. Now, there's another interesting thing because of AI enablement and ChatGPT and the open sourcing of all these visualizations that has been going on over the last 10 years, it actually is not that difficult to start sort of a base level BI company.
If you're in the software development world, or if you've been reading about it, you know, the rise of vibe coding, of tools like Claude Code, the idea that, you know, the developer as a profession is living on borrowed time, as ironically AI tools are replacing software developers. Hyped or overhyped, that's the narrative that's out there. It's imaginable that the traditional role, like the data analyst and the data engineer, are equally being threatened potentially by AI tools. If you're a data professional today, a data analyst today, how worried should you be that your job is at risk, and what new skills should you be focusing on?
I think that there is going to be job risk. I mean, I read recently in a report that 60% of the jobs that we have today didn't exist in 1940. So, and things are moving faster now than they were back, much faster now. So it's possible that within another 20 years, 60% of the jobs that exist today won't exist. So upskilling is an absolute necessity. Now, when that happened over the last period of time, it didn't mean people ran out of work. It just meant they had to upskill to be able to get work. And the same thing is happening. And so from the data analyst and business analyst perspective, two things. One, they're forced to learn more about the business because they have to become more strategic. And we used to do the old business intelligence competency centers where we would teach the data people about the business and business people about data, right? They got to upskill. They got to learn about how business operates. Knowing about data is no longer enough. And number two, I think they have to understand applications and agentic AI, because the goal is going to be not just to leverage insight, it's going to be to figure out, how do I get that insight into a machine, into an application, into an AI agent that is going to act on behalf of people. It used to be, how do I get it to people? It has gradually become, how do I get it to machine and application? Those areas are all going to grow. So you have to, I think, for data professionals and business intelligence professionals especially, they have to figure out, they have to up-level into that area to better understand integration of insight into devices and apps and applications and agents.
A wise man once said, approximately 50 minutes ago, question everything. And I think one of the other skill sets that we're going to need to work on is learning to ask better questions, framing your question with precision, because I think in some respects the answer that you'll get out of these tools is only going to be as good as your ability to form a brilliant question.
Absolutely. I think that there's two ways to look at the AI invasion, right? One is, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. There's probably three ways. The other is to just use AI to help you do your job. But then you become everybody that just uses AI to be more productive will become just like everybody else, because it becomes the lowest common denominator. Maybe the lowest common denominator is a little higher than it would have been because of the AI, but eventually it all equals out. So the question becomes, how do I use AI more strategically in my job? How do I think creatively in ways that AI can't think? How do I use AI as a strategic partner to help me think better about things? It's a chance. It was like the Industrial Revolution. People either became these factory workers that only did what they're told and never thought, or they figured out how to elevate themselves above that industrial revolution and to still be creative, to still be strategic. There will always be things we do as humans that technology will never do. And so we have to continue to become more strategic, more creative in the ways we use AI.
Brilliant stuff. A fabulous conversation. I really do appreciate you taking the time this morning to join us. If people are interested in learning more about the future of BI, data warehouse, data intelligence, all things data and AI, where can they go to learn more?
Best thing is connect with me on LinkedIn or check out my podcast, the Digital Analyst Podcast. It's on the InsightJam.com channel on YouTube. And I just hit 400,000 views, 20 episodes. So super excited to have you guys join me there as well.
Congratulations. I admire your success. Gianni, grazie mille. Thank you so much for joining us, John.
Prego.
It's absolutely fabulous having you here. I'd love to get you back on to talk about this as the whole space develops. It's fascinating.
Great to meet you, Paul. We got to do this again.
Absolutely. Well, with that, guys, that's a wrap. What's your take? Are you feeling more intelligent? Is your business feeling more intelligent? I hope so. Drop your thoughts into the comments, what you like and love and loathe about the state of modern BI and what you think AI could be doing better. I'd love to hear from it. And thank you again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast. Thanks for, I was going to say tuning in, but we've got no radios anymore. Thanks for listening in. We'll see you all next week.